Season 3, Episode 1.
I would agree, but it's not. You can't do that without testing. So that's what it comes down to. So it depends on context.
Again, I'm hearing you,
You're not agreeing with me.
But I'm not going to respect your preferences on this one. This is UX Podcast. I'm James Royal-Lawson.
And I'm Per Axbom.
And we are two humans here to help you push the boundaries of how user experience is perceived and boost your confidence in the work you do. We're based in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening to us all over the world, from Fiji to Finland. So this is the start of Series 3, and welcome back, Per. I mean, in the true spirit of sustainability, we decided not to throw you away, and instead, we've replaced bits of you. So, renewed you and brought you back. And you're now 99.6% Per and 0.04% something else.
Mechanical, I suppose. Yeah.
Cyber Per. And you're good?
I'm good. My mechanical heart valve was installed. There was no issues, and I'm feeling as healthy as ever. More so even, of course, than before my operation.
Which, actually, if there's just one thing you want, it's to feel better after an operation than before it. Oh. Anyway, welcome back, and welcome to Series 3. And we're kicking off this season with a topic show. We're talking about dark mode. Now, I'm not going to make the presumption that everyone knows what dark mode is. I mean, it's really easy to say, oh, well, we're all designers. Of course we know what dark mode is. But we can't do that. So, Per, what is dark mode?
Well, I hardly knew what dark mode was, just a year ago.
Really?
Because it essentially means, well, I started getting dark mode, I think, by mistake on my phone. And hadn't realized where did that come from? Where is this setting? Right. And because this setting obviously can be on your phone, as is usually the case these days when I come across it. And apparently some apps prefer dark mode, and they start in dark mode. And then I realize I'm in dark mode because I'm get thrown out from the app and into website. Oh, and then obviously the background is light there for some reason.
Oh, right, yeah. So you notice the difference because you've been in an app and then you go out of the app to something else that doesn't respect those settings.
Exactly. Everything looks differently when some pages open through the internal web browser of the app as well.
Right. I mean, for me, of course, I've at least in my Android telephone, then dark mode has always been something that has kicked in when the battery gets low. It goes below exactly. It goes below a certain percent, and things go over to the operating system on the phone goes over to dark mode. And by dark mode, we mean where generally things are based on a dark palette. So rather than the default of white backgrounds, which if you're starting a web page or you're starting off, then often you would have a white background as your starting point, and then you'd build things on top of layers on top of that white background. Generally. Dark mode is when we switch this round and we have generally a dark colour at the bottom and you work up from that in darker toned
which of course is how some people actually design their websites from the start.
Yes.
So some websites are designed to have a dark background or a black background from the start, and that's the default setting for a website.
Yeah. I mean, design aesthetics. I mean, yes, you might have designed a dark themed website or a light themed website, and yeah, fair enough. But just because you've designed a dark themed website doesn't necessarily mean to say that it is dark mode.
Exactly. And this is what I think what I mean when I say, well, I'm not sure how long I've actually known about the fact of dark mode being a user preference that can turn up in all these different contexts, in the operating system, in the browser, and somewhere else as well, I think.
But, I mean, what's the point of dark mode, though, Per? Why is this a thing?
Well, when you listen to people, because you hear a lot of people these days saying they prefer dark mode. And when they say they prefer it, they say it's easier on the eyes. There's less eye strain, which would sort of make me allude to, because I think a lot about accessibility. I think, well, that's a good thing then probably. If they feel better reading that, that's great. But then you start thinking, well, how much should I take into account how people feel when they read my website? And is there any science behind this? Because some people just say, it looks better. They love it. They love the way that it looks. And there are some other things that people bring up as well, like battery savings and stuff like that.
Yeah, the battery saving, like I said, that's something I recognise from my telephone, that it kicks into dark mode automatically when the battery's low. And that does actually save power if it's a certain type of screen.
Yeah. Has to be an OLED screen, right? Yeah,
and that's something I think I maybe didn't really think about. That, you know, when we're sat here at on desktop machines, generally they're LED screens with backlights. So if you take a monitor apart, often it's a string of LED lights that are behind the screen that shine light through the pixels to make them light up. Whereas the OLED screens, which are nowadays pretty much all your telephones are those ones, at least the ones that have been manufactured in the last half decade, they have little lights in each pixel.
Right, exactly.
So it's not backlit in the same way. So when you make them shine less, you are saving power across the whole thing. Whereas on an old LED screen or old backlit ones, then the light's on.
Yeah. But from what I understand, based on the research as well, it's really the strength of the brightness of your screen that is the most important thing. So you can have full brightness in the dark mode, but light mode, but with less brightness on your screen. And less brightness on your screen generally means you're using less power. Yeah,
I read that if the most saving you could have on your battery is by running dark mode in bright sunshine.
Oh, interesting.
So you've got auto brightness, so the screen goes bright because it's sunny outside or whatever. Yeah. So you save most battery by putting in dark mode in the brightest conditions.
Ah, the difference that you're saying. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, which is...
How much power can I save?
No idea if it's good. I don't know what kind of benefits other than that is.
The best thing you can do is turn off your phone.
I think flight mode or turning it off is if you're really, really, really critical level of battery, yeah. But, I mean, is there anything else that's useful with dark mode?
Well, I was alluding to accessibility, I guess.
Accessibility.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, to be honest, that's where we've come from for this topic episode, accessibility. Yeah. And what's happening right now in Europe is there's a law coming. Well, there's been a directive, the accessibility directive, that is due to be put into force by all the member countries in June 2025. And by and large, the accessibility directive, it covers quite a lot of areas, industries, and it covers more than just web. It covers products and terminals and customer support and so on. But from a web and app perspective, the European Accessibility Directive basically enshrines WCAG into itself, so you have to adhere to it.
Yeah.
The European standard, if you want to know the numbers of these things, and this is important to remember, EN 301549. Wonderfully snappy name. It kind of beats WCAG 2.1 or 2.2, hands over feet, I think. But that standard is what we need to follow in many, many situations now in European countries or in companies and organisations that have something to do with Europe, effectively. So
exactly.
I think from a designer point of view, we're getting to the point now where in a lot of situations you can't duck accessibility. You can't not have knowledge about what it means in your work.
Oh, that's definitely true. I wish it had been true for longer than that, but you're absolutely right. And also, I hear it so much more in conversation. People are aware of it because these laws are coming. Yeah. So that's a good thing.
Legal departments are concerned about it.
Yes.
And that helps.
Yes.
But one thing in particular, when it comes to dark mode, the European standard doesn't actually specifically say you have to implement dark mode. But what it does have is something, a section called 11.7. Now, what's I think is really interesting about 11.7 user preferences is this is something which isn't part of WCAG. And by and large, from the web point of view, everything we need to care about is just in that standard, the international standard. But 11.7 user preferences is something that the EU has added on top of that.
Yep.
And that gets me really interested because, of course, this is now additional. This is I suppose a new thing and a broader thing. 11.7 user preferences. Now, what that means, I think I said to you, Per, before we started recording, it's effectively an infinity pit, which sounds really kind of brutal. But what you need to do as part of that part of the standard is adhere to a user's preferences.
Yeah. Follow the values of the user preferences for platform settings for, and a list, units of measurement, color, contrast, font type, font size, and focus cursor.
So what this means to us is when we're designing websites and apps, it's not a question of offering something. This is a question of respecting something.
I love this because you said this to me before we recorded, and I just it's so weird thinking, well, okay, so I don't have to actually give the user a choice. I just have to implement it to make sure it's there.
Yeah, which is really interesting. So dark mode, you don't have to offer dark mode, but if you can sense, you can read this through the web browser. If you can sense or read that a user would prefer dark mode or prefer light mode, then you have to respect that choice.
Okay, so this actually creates somewhat of a conflict for me in my reasoning, because the person may not be aware of the setting. Like I'm sort of not aware for some apps. Why is it dark? Why is it light? Sometimes I just don't care. I don't hunt for the setting. But people are not always aware of the setting, and sometimes they do want to have it different for different interfaces because it makes sense to them, or because the website has implemented something poorly. So they would want the choice, but I don't have to give it.
But at the same time, if you feel like that, Pat, then I think absolutely that sounds like a good argument for you offering the choice as well as respecting the choice. So there's absolutely nothing in this standard that says that you can't, actually actively offer a choice of dark mode to users that visit your site. But you do still have to, at least in the first instance, respect their inherited choice from their platform. You can override it, but you need to respect the underlying one.
Yeah.
And when I said about this being like an infinity hole, it kind of is user. You listed some of the things that you need to respect, but from a web perspective, this is a lot of stuff I need to respect. I mean, you're talking about not just color preferences, light mode, dark mode, contrast, high contrast, low contrast, the font that's being used. Although that I don't think you can actually do much about when you're in a web page. It's just going to be overridden. But font size, there's also something that you need to respect. You gone are the days where you can use fixed number of pixels for anything text. You can't do it anymore. It's not going to be compliant. Yeah.
And sometimes when you dive into what these preferences really mean, I was surprised when I saw that for, like, if you say that you prefer a contrast of high or more, as the setting is. You can also have a custom setting, which means the user can notify the system about using a specific set of colors, and the contrast implied by these colors have to match either more or less. It's just like so difficult. There's no way of testing that.
Well, yes,
for all the possible variations.
Exactly, Pan. That's one of the things I think that's challenging with this, is that the European law is very broad, and what's required is that the authorities, the national authorities for each European country, will have to state what the local adaptation of this law means in their instance. So that gives you some kind of way of narrowing down what you need to test and what you need to focus on to be compliant with this. Because, we can have the overall ambition of honouring all user preferences, but it's just infeasible to test, and it's just going to eat you alive.
But you still have to do something. Yeah,
and that is where dark mode comes into it, because dark mode is going to be one of those things that I think many countries do actually officially state it's something you need to do.
Yeah.
I've been discussing the possibility that we should honour prefers reduced motion as well, for example. But that's not yet been something I've seen mentioned too many times in various conversations about this. But I still would encourage people who are doing websites to look at that
Definitely.
setting.
I think the reason people don't talk about it is because there's not that many websites with that much motion and animation. But the ones that do have it, I really would like that setting myself.
Well, I just think, one of the things that often pops up is, we're using transitions more and more on stuff we do, and small animations. Many websites have some kind of loading indicator for something. Yeah. These things with some kind of degree of motion do actually appear. So, I'd encourage people to think about reduced and prefers reduced motion. But dark mode, this is where I think is the big win for accessibility and us as designers, where we need to really put some effort into understanding what can be done and what should be done.
It's funny because when you read up on this and people have realized, we need a dark mode, you see all these. It's almost like it's always the case when you talk about accessibility. We want a quick fix. Please give me a quick fix. And people say, well, I have this CSS that you can apply, and it's only 7 lines of code, and you're done. Here, you can have it. And of course, unfortunately, it's not that easy.
Well, you say that, but to be honest, Per, I think in some situations you might well make quite a bit of difference just by doing that.
I would agree, but it's not. You can't do that without testing. So that's what it comes down to. So it depends on context.
Again, I'm hearing you,
You're not agreeing with me.
But I'm not going to respect your preferences on this one. No, I was just thinking here is there's in Chrome anyway. There's an experimental feature which is basically forced dark mode. So you can go into the flags in Chrome and you can tell it to apply dark mode to web pages, and that you don't have much choice about as a website because you don't know it's been done. It's just going to be done to your page.
Done anyway.
Yeah, without testing. So when there's that kind of experimental feature, and people do have plugins for this as well. I mean, if you read up about
right, so if the user themselves is completely responsible for now I'm going to go in and change everything, then of course it's up to them.
Yeah. So if you haven't got the means and ability to do a very thoughtful dark mode, or you don't have time to kind of go into all your components, dig down into your design system, and your backlog's already 2 years long, it's going to be impossible. Then maybe you could look into some of these quick solutions. I mean, I found one that was one line.
I know you sent that to me.
Which was
that was actually quite impressive.
Yeah, I've actually tested it on my website, and I was actually quite impressed. It didn't. I mean, I've got some stuff on mine that's not accessible anyway, contrast-wise, which I need to get around to fixing. My backlog is also long. But this was just where you took the HTML tag for a web page, and in CSS you added a filter to that, a filter that was invert 1. And
very simple solution.
It's very simple, and it was remarkably good. It even does some of the images as well.
Yeah, but specifically for images, what it did is actually it makes the image look like a negative.
Yes, the filter is an invert.
Yeah, exactly.
So it literally inverts it.
That's probably where a designer would say, "No, sir, that's not going to work for me."
Yeah, yes. I'd probably want to do some more CSS that stopped it from doing it to the images, but as a brutal one-line solution, that was surprisingly good.
The brutal dark mode, I like that.
The brutal dark mode, the quick and dirty dark mode. But it's not a good long-term solution, that one, because it doesn't involve any thought. So there will be things that aren't going to work. And things that as a designer you're going to be unhappy about. I know one of the things about dark mode that comes up is it's quite normal that we use shadowing and layers to create depth in designs, and you do that through grey panels basically, or translucent panels. When you invert that with a dark base, then it doesn't quite work as well.
No, you don't. I mean, yeah, exactly. Shadow. You don't want the shadow to be lighter than the background. It just looks weird. So there's the recommendation there is actually just if you want layers or shadows, you still have to fix it so that the darkest color is the one that is the furthest behind the field of vision.
Yeah, you will need to alter your depths of color, I guess, so that it does work on that scale, and it doesn't quite work just by inverting. So that's a good example of where my HTML filter invert 1 does fall over a bit, because it's not going to give you the feeling that you would like maybe from.
And then there's the other example is the website logo is usually in a color, so it's like the same for images. But I was thinking specifically of photos before. But if you have like a graphic that is your logo, you probably want to do something to it to make sure it works in both light and dark. I mean, it's perfectly possible, of course, to change out the logo with your style sheet, but it's also possible, depending on where the dark mode setting is changed, maybe the CSS doesn't even detect it, like you were saying. You set the dark mode in the browser, like hard-coded in there. You'd want to, and I thought that's something I actually am going to try out myself, to design my logo in a way that it actually works for both modes.
Well, I've seen that over the years from in kind of corporate style guides and branding guides, that they do have logos designed for light and dark backgrounds.
Right.
It's not unusual to see that.
But to change it yourself, you have to be aware of the user setting, and that's not always the case.
But the same, here's a good point now for us to get into the practical side of how you deal with this. Because I mean, thinking about it, when I've seen, I mean, so many people have Figma designs and Figma files for designs now. It's not that common for me to see a dark mode design presented.
Oh, I completely agree.
I mean, it's of course nowadays I'm going to expect a mobile version to be presented. I'd kind of like to see that presented first in many situations, even though often, more often than not, it's still desktop ones get presented first. Dark mode is something I just don't see, which implies that people are not putting the time from the beginning to think about how this would work.
And that is if you have time to. Well, I'm going to get into technical things now again, because you were mentioning Figma, and you and I probably don't work as much in Figma as most other designers, and love to design prototypes because you can actually understand how it works. In that case, the code you mentioned before, just one line of code, is a perfect way of just testing what are the things I need to start thinking about. So in a prototype setting, I really support the use of short CSS like code snippets to just test, well, what's going to change? What do I need to think about? And from that, design your dark mode.
Yeah, they're actually quite. I suppose there are a number of ways you can deal with this. Though I'm not, like you said, I'm not completely on top of how you do it in Figma. But from what I've understood, you can make use of variables in Figma to allow light and dark modes. You create some color variables, and then you create aliases or design tokens, and then you would switch, or you assign your dark modes or assign tokens to a mode, and then you would switch which set you're using from your layers. I'm saying this because I don't really know exactly what you do because I've never tried it.
It makes no sense to me to do
it
there.
Makes no sense. But basically, there seems to be ways you can deal with variables in Figma to actually make it possible to switch between variants, which made me think about how that's kind of that feels like it's on the right lines, because how you would potentially do this on a website in a way which I think is more efficient is you would add color scheme in CSS to your pages. And with color scheme, you can say, light and dark. And then when you go on to defining, say, like, I don't know, a color of a button, you would actually list both the colors. So you would list them both so that it you can actually automatically, you'd put them in the same place. So you wouldn't have to do a media query and two separate sets of CSS. So that you've got, here's the CSS for dark mode, here's the CSS for mobile dark mode. So suddenly you've got 8, 9, 10 different sets of CSS. You actually bake it together. So you say, hey, look, this is still my CSS for this width. But in every definition, I'm giving you the 2 variants that you need to cope with this.
You're essentially using variables in CSS as well.
It's effectively the same thing, just structured slightly differently. But that cuts down your work. I mean, as a designer, this is just then something you're just specifying for the component. It's decide one, supply everywhere. Pretty much, just like it would be if you're deciding that the button's blue and that the button's going to have this blue on hover, this blue on active. Then you've done those 3-4 variations of the button and made sure they work. You just do it at the same time you do the other ones. I'm making it sound very easy to design a button, and we all know it's not always that easy to design a button.
That easy. And sometimes it may make more sense to actually do the inversion by calculations rather than specific colors, because then it would be easier if you change one color. Then you don't have to find the corresponding dark mode color because it's calculated according to some predetermined formula that everyone is agreeing on.
Yeah, possibly. I think, though, the variables is probably a safer way of doing that, because of tokens and variables, because at least then it's more transparent. Cause, as me and you talk about, the whole thing with algorithms, that often it hides complexity under the surface, so you don't understand what's happening.
Definitely.
The advantage of tokens and variables is that it's visible, that you can actually see the chain, you see what's happening, and more comprehensible perhaps than a formula.
Then I'd have to encourage designers as well to use dark mode more as well, to just get into the understanding of what are the things that can go wrong, what looks weird, what contrast issues can there be, to get like this feeling and experience of what goes wrong when we use dark mode across the web. So set dark mode for a week. That would be my challenge after listening to this episode on your desktop.
Yeah, actually, Per, one thing that I've had for years now is, I've got pretty much every web browser that I can installed. So in one of them, I have it set to prefers dark mode.
Excellent suggestion. Yes.
So this means that, and so when if I want to test something, then I'll just open up that web browser and just move the URL across, and so there I can see it in dark mode. And that's been really, really useful and really good. And just like you say I sometimes forget about whether sites have it or not, because you kind of used to certain ones seeing them all the time in dark mode or not. But that's one of my tips. Have a browser that you have set to dark mode.
And then it becomes interesting, because if what you were saying before about 11.7 is that it also, if a user preference is high contrast, then we maybe need a third option or a third design.
Yeah, or not, because I mean I'm not exactly sure what high contrast means from a legal from the standards point of view. I'm going to make a guess that it's the AAA level of
that would be
WCAG.
My guess as well. Yeah.
Which is fantastic. If that's the case, then we've suddenly in Europe got a situation where we're by and large following WCAG 2.1. Well, actually, kind of 2.2 plus 11.7 in the form of things like high contrast, which means you're pulling in the AAA high contrast from WCAG 2.2.
Exactly.
But you can only you could just go for AAA in the first place.
Definitely.
From a complexity point of view, if you want to keep it more simple, then don't worry about high contrast.
Yeah.
I think this is okay to say, just go for AAA in the first place, and have.
But then there's also a user preference that says less contrast.
Yeah.
So don't forget about that. And that's sort of what I meant before with websites. Also, they start designing in dark mode. That doesn't mean that that's the only one you have to offer. If you design your website by default in dark mode, you also have to have a light mode CSS.
Yeah. I think what's beautiful about this part is, going back, what is it now? It's rapidly approaching, 14, 15 years since we had responsive web make its appearance. The whole thing with user preferences and viewports and responsive web, we really are getting to that point now where we as designers really need to let go, and we need to adopt a fully fluid way of working. I mean, sure, design systems have also nudged us in that direction, but design systems and their components are very kind of like, they're boxes. Yeah. They have their ins and outs. You put that into it, you get that out of it. Whereas with what we're talking about now, and what you're mentioning with high contrast, low contrast, dark mode, light mode, increased font size, reduced motion, small viewport, zoomed, all of these things are variables. All of these things can be combined. As a designer, the days where I can say 100 pixels wide, white. You know what I mean? I mean, the days where you can specify in a way which is concrete is gone.
And you need to embrace that and think of it as a good thing. That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's lovely. That's what I love about HTML.
It's beautiful.
It's so adaptable.
Yeah, it's so robust. And yes, it causes a lot of problems for the fact it's so robust. But at the same time, just diving straight into this and embracing a world that is fluid, and that your design needs to be robust, and it needs to cope with larger font sizes, with high contrast, different colors, all these things we've listed. Your design needs to not break.
Yeah.
Just like we've talked about how with mobile, your mobile viewport design needs to not break. Desktop one, not break. We're just making sure things don't break.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. How hard can it be?
So what should people listen to next, James?
Episode 235 from Series 1, which is Internet Anxiety with David Swallow.
Oh, I don't remember all of that, but that was probably a very interesting episode.
It was. I mean, and David works a huge amount with accessibility. And what we talk about in that episode, amongst many other interesting things, we talk about the prefers or CSS pseudo properties, and also David actually says that the suggestion that we should have prefers reduced anxiety.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Which is a wonderful thing. And if you combine that now with the law we've just talked about, having to respect that preference would be a wonderful thing.
Yes.
So dig that episode out, or click on the activate the link.
Prefers no dark patterns. Prefers. There are so many things to just not prefer.
Well, not prefer, yeah. But you can listen to that, and I recommend you do. It's healthy listening.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. All right, Per. So, why do programmers prefer dark mode?
I actually want to think about this, but yeah, I don't know, James. Why do programmers prefer dark mode?
Because light attracts bugs.